This new lens is selling like hot pancakes, competing for titles like the new budget king of street photography and the most compact pancake lens of all time. This is the brand new Viltrox 28mm f4.5 lens, and it's absolutely tiny. Even for a pancake lens, it's almost half the size of other pancake lenses I've seen. Pretty much the same thickness as a lens cap. To boot that off, this thing also has full frame coverage, and the most surprising thing to me is that they still managed to fit a tiny little motor in here, so this thing still has autofocus. And that's not all, Viltrox somehow managed to price this at $100. But is it all too good to be true? Is it actually a good lens? Well, today I'm gonna go for a little drive down the St. Clair River and we'll see how this lens actually stands up to the hype. Now, before I get too far in this video, I do wanna say I did purchase this lens myself. Viltrox has nothing to do with his production at all. So take whatever I say with a grain of salt. Anyways, just know all the thoughts about this lens is my own opinion. Now, Viltrox is calling this lens chip, and it's a little weird because their product page is pretty ambiguous about why they're calling it that. Besides that, they have this pretty good looking lady eating the lens like it's a chip, which is really weird, but if that's what sells, I can't be complaining. On the topic of chips though, one thing I really do like with this lens already is that most pancake lenses are usually manual focus and they're made by third-party manufacturers. So usually they opt to not even bother installing one of those electronic chips, which is what tells your camera what lens you're using and collects all that metadata, which is a huge pain in the butt when lenses don't have that, because you have to manually input what focal length you're using on your camera, so the IBIS inside the camera doesn't go all funky. And the second reason why it's a big pain in the butt is because when you import all these images in the Lightroom, because you didn't collect the metadata, you have to manually input all the lens corrections for each photo. And if you're shooting across 2 manual focus lenses, 3 manual focus lenses, it gets very confusing very fast, and you can't even filter out what images unless you manually tag them. Alright, so this is looking like a pretty good spot to stop, so I'm gonna find somewhere to park and then hop out and take some photos. Boop. Boop. Perfect. So there's this massive tanker boat coming, so I'm gonna grab a photo of that. Yeah, I never actually stopped at this park ever before. I've always drove right past it. It's a nice chilling park if you just want to watch boats cross. I might just hop back in the car and just jaunt over there. It says danger, no trespassing. That's a suggestion if I've ever started one. Overall, these images are looking pretty good. The center is really sharp, but the edges have a bit of fall off, and there's also quite a bit of noticeable vignetting. But other than that, the chromatic aberration and distortion on this lens is actually really well controlled, which is really impressive for how inexpensive this lens is. Now, something I can't actually get over about this lens is just how small it is. It's 13 millimeters thick, which something on like an A7C, this is borderline a pocketable camera. Now, the lens itself is a bit plasticky, but surprisingly enough, it does have a metal mount, which is all welcome for, but that actually doesn't help with its durability because the rear lens actually protrudes a little bit. So if you put this down on the lens side, it actually is gonna cause the lens to wobble all on that glass element, which is really bad. It might scratch the rear element of the lens, or worse, it could track dust or dirt or gunk into your sensor. The lens itself isn't weather sealed, so if it starts raining, put this thing away. The front of the lens doesn't have any filter threads, so you can't put any filters on this lens, but it does have this little tab here that allows you to close this little cover for the front element, which I'm probably never gonna use, but it's kind of just fun to flip around. Anyways, I'm gonna hop back in the car and let's just keep going down river to see what else we can get. So one thing I find really weird about this lens is that it's a fixed f4.5 aperture, which isn't a big deal because I can work around that for the most part, but it does mean I'm pretty much just stuck with whatever shutter speed I'm left with. So if you like to do a lot of things with slow shutter speeds, you're pretty much just out of luck. Unless you want to get into in-body filter things, which you can, it's just a massive pain in the butt to do for this kind of lens. So this spot looks pretty cool, so I'm gonna hop out and grab a few more pics. So I want to show you guys a focus test here just so you can get an idea of how fast this lens is, but it really is quite slow. It's a bit slow to focus, but it's definitely workable. I also found this lens doesn't really understand where to focus on or what to focus on all the time. Even if I have face detection on or tracking, it will get confused and just start focusing on things in the background, which is just super frustrating. Currently, I'm using my A7R5, which is a kick-ass camera for autofocusing, so I don't think I can really blame it on the camera. I find it probably misses 1 out of 3 or 4 times, which is quite a lot to have a 25% miss rate. However, they did include a USB-C port in the back of the lens, so they could update this later in the future, but really there's no way to really know if that is something they're going to be working on. For my video people out there, there is quite a bit of focus breathing, and it's pretty audible, so depending on your mic setup, that might be something to consider. Now, something I wish this lens could do better at is having a slightly better minimum focusing range. It has about a foot range, which is pretty much about sticking my arm out when I have my camera in front of me. Feels like it should fill up the whole frame. It doesn't even come close, and it just leaves a lot to be desired, you know? Comparing that to something like my Batis 25mm, which is a comparable focal length, that lens can pretty much focus all the way up to the lens and create a ton of separation. Now, if I had to choose one gripe that was the worst thing about this lens, is that it doesn't have any manual focusing at all. So you have to completely rely on the autofocusing, which feels really clunky at times. Now, when I first got this lens, I actually took it to the Blue Water Bridge. I discovered that there's a whole world of raccoons living under the rocks. There was like 20 of them popping their heads in and out. I found the lens was able to track the raccoons, but not very well. This is when I kind of wish I had manual focus. Now, for how often I'm gonna find myself in that situation again, it's probably gonna be far and few in between, but it does come up enough where it could get pretty annoying. Anyways, let's keep going down the river a little bit more, and I'm gonna see if we can get some cool Sunstars or something. So I didn't drive too far. I just pretty much just drove like 30 seconds up. I found this really nice dock area. So I think I'm just gonna stop here, grab a few photos. Now, this lens is actually capable of producing 8-point Sunstars, which is a bit weird because it's an f4.5 lens, which I think it's because the front element here is octagonal shape. I think that's the reason why it can produce Sunstars at such a high f number, but it's a little bit weird. Not the cleanest Sunstars I've ever seen, but the fact that it can produce some is a bonus, I guess. One thing I do like about this lens though is the flaring on it. It's kind of like it's like a black mist filter on the lens already, which I personally like, but it might not be for everyone. There is a lot of time when this flare is not the best and produces like this really gross, ugly looking thing. But yeah, it's kind of just like a big mixed bag of nice flaring and bad flaring. So I just discovered a new issue that I don't think anyone has even realized yet or noticed. As I was taking those photos, I was noticing some really weird vignetting. As I was taking this photo pointed this way towards the sun, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. It was like this weird crossbar. It was causing some weird flaring and like a bunch of stuff. I started just messing around with a bunch of settings, took off the lens, and I was like, oh, maybe my camera's broken. I started changing the shutter speed to see what was going on. I realized if you choose this lens and you shoot over 4,000 shutter speed, it causes something weird to happen in the lens. I'm not entirely sure. As I went from 4,000 higher up, it got worse and worse. So when I got to 1/8,000 of a second, 1/4 of the frame was basically just all black, and it's just not a good look. Other than that, I'm gonna do my final conclusions back at the home office. It's about 5 o'clock, so everyone's coming home, and it's just car after car after car coming around me, and audio is atrocious. So before it gets worse, I'm gonna head back home. See you there. Okay, we are back. So what do I actually think about this lens? Personally, I think it's a decent pancake lens, and the fact that it has autofocus is a huge plus. But to be honest, the autofocus feels a bit too slow for me, and it does feel weird to pair it with a newer generation E-mount camera like my A7R5, which is the camera I want to use when I want reliable focusing. It just makes me think, why am I spending $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 on a camera and then pairing it with a $100 lens that just makes it feel clunky to use? Now, if I was an A7C user or just had an older A7 camera that I was using as a beater camera that I didn't really care about and I could just throw it in my pocket, then this lens would be a lot more appealing. It's kind of like a poor man's Leica Q, but with just a lot of drawbacks. Overall though, for $100, I'm pretty impressed by this lens. Optically, it's pretty sharp, the distortions and chromatic aberrations are really well controlled, and the vignetting really isn't that bad either, and it's easily fixable in post as long as you're not shooting 1/4000th of a second, as I mentioned earlier. It's honestly just fun, casual, and tiny. If you're okay with the caveats of the lens and seeking the ultimate compact package, this lens definitely has to be on your radar. And I'll have a link below if you want to check it out for yourself. Also, if you like this video about lenses, I recommend checking out this lens. It's the widest and weirdest lens I own, and it's another compact full frame lens. An ultra wide 11mm f4.5 that's rectilinear, meaning it's not a fisheye lens and can shoot some really crazy stuff. Now, if you made it this far into the video, I'd appreciate if you could give this video a like or subscribe to the channel if you want to stay in touch for future videos. And until next time, ciao.